Hello, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to Satsang. Satsang is an ancient spiritual practice from India. It means being in reality together. I give Satsang live every Wednesday and Sunday night in Portland, Maine. This Dharma talk was recorded during one of our Wednesday night gatherings. Please visit jayakula.org to learn more about the teachings. You can find video satsangs on Jayakula's YouTube channel, and my books are all available on Amazon.com. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. Venus and Jupiter are considered to be the gurus of the solar system. Jupiter of higher wisdom, so-called, and Venus of the wisdom of every day. We need wisdom to live well in an everyday, ordinary sense, and we need wisdom to seek the Supreme Self. Saturn is said to be the servant of the gods. And so you could say that Saturn is the one who is given to the gods. Always serving what? Serving wisdom. When we are under the influence of Saturn, we turn towards Sat. Sat means reality. This is why people despair when they go into a Saturn period or Saturn is having a major impact. Because most of us would rather not turn towards Sat. In the sense that Saturn gives us opportunities to turn towards Sat. In a sense, at least equal to Jupiter, Saturn is a good friend to the yogi or the yogini. Because this is about turning toward reality. It's not about building a better fantasy or just making a more comfortable home in the ordinary. It's actually about serving wisdom, learning how to do that. And that means turning toward reality, what is actually happening. In order to give us an opportunity to do that, there's a certain amount of fierceness that is associated with Saturn. Saturn is pictured as a dry, elder, very stern kind of a person. The kind of person, older person who, when you try to run your usual shtick, goes, "That's a bunch of crap." I'm not buying that. Right? That's like Saturn, right? There's a certain sense in which Saturn holds us down, forcing us to look at the reality of our situation. And when we're not going willingly, Saturn creates fierce situations in our life that force us, if we have even a small bit of wisdom, force us to look at our real situation. So that means things like loss and death and very famously restriction. Saturn is famous for kind of restricting you from what you want in an ordinary way so that you'll really feel your compulsion and get on with the job of relaxing it. In a sense, and if we're talking about astrology, Saturn is really the tantric planet, the representative of direct realization traditions amongst the planets. Saturn's color is black, and of course, the color of hardcore tantric practitioners is also black. There's a reason for that, because when you're really suited for this kind of tradition, there's a kind of bring it on attitude. And that's a very Saturn-like attitude. But that fierceness is really the fierceness of just being willing to, first of all, the most fierce thing is to be willing to look at circumstance without the blinders of fantasy. That's the real fierce thing. To just be able to be with what actually is without trying to ignore it or numb out from it or prettify it or run your fixations around it. That's really the ultimate fierceness. There are, in these direct realization traditions, there's a culture of fierceness that you could say relates to this Saturnine quality. Right? And that shows up in a lot of different ways. It shows up in the teaching style and the studenting style also. There's a bunch of ways that this kind of fierceness can show up. One is in the practice. There are some fierce, what are called cutting through practices. Cutting through what? Cutting through fixation fantasies, cutting through realm vision, karmic realm vision. So you can, be in your karmic realm vision woods, plodding along step by step with your little backpack of fixations and attachments. And then, as you go along, you can slowly be letting things go. That's one way. Or you can be in that woods with your little backpack and all of a sudden, a giant lawnmower comes through and raises the whole thing, rips off your backpack, and you're standing there naked in an empty field looking at the sky.
Do we have a choice in this?
Absolutely. But you won't make that choice like you make the choice about whether to order a cheese or a ham sandwich. It's not that kind of choice. It's the choice that arises out of your karmic configuration, how you showed up, what you're able to digest, what you desire, if you're even able to see that there's anything of value to this method. But, in these kind of traditions, it's not like that's always happening unless you are really an extraordinary student. And there are very, very few students who ever want anything that full on. But nonetheless, there will always be those moments. Right? That's just, it's woven into the whole tradition. It's woven into certain practices that we do, certain mantras that we do, the form of the student-teacher relationship. There's many different ways that it shows up. It's not like one particular way. For instance, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, he never talked above this volume. If you didn't know him, all you heard was his voice. Oh, hi, sweethearts, how are you? You'd think he was the sweetest, gentlest, non-fiercest teacher on the planet, but try spending a half an hour with him. Right? Every button that you have is going to be pressed. And you'll probably just be exhausted at the end of a half hour. Only, he was that intense in other ways. But, just from his voice, you couldn't really tell that. Other teachers yell a lot. Other teachers don't say anything. I was talking about a teacher of a friend of mine. I never met this teacher, but I've only heard about him through my friend. But apparently, this teacher would hardly ever say anything to anybody. The students would blah, 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 and the teacher would be like, for like 20 years. So it's not like the fierceness looks like any particular one thing. It can show up in lots of different packages, right? But the point of it is to get you to have a direct experience of your condition, and or to kind of clear everything out for a moment so you're naked. Right? So some forms of fierceness are so that you see what's actually happening, to cut through your fantasy, you see what's actually going on. Other kinds are just clear everything out. Right? There's also a kind of fierceness that relates to the tradition of teaching in the whole Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma is the actual name for what the British colonialists called Hinduism. It means the eternal path, or the eternal way, or the eternal duty, or the eternal job. And that is, if you're in the midst of some fixation, running something, something's happening, you're deep in it, and I come up to you and I tap you on the shoulder, and I say, I think you might be in a state of fantasy right there. Not quite sure if I'm right, but could be. You're going to just keep right on going, right? But if I say something very fierce and cutting through, like, yeah, right? Not only are you going to stop, but you're going to remember that next time you get into that, right? It's going to create this samskara, basically. So if you look in the teaching texts of the tradition, if you look in the divinatory methods, there are all kinds of examples of hyperbole. For instance, if you do this to your teacher, you have sex with your teacher's spouse. Okay, this is something that's written about in the Tantras. Things you should not do. You will burn in 10,000 hells for all eternity. It's not that anybody really thinks that's going to happen. It's just, if you believe it, you probably will think twice before doing whatever it is. So there's a sense in which the density and the cloudiness and the persistence of our fixations has to be met with something intense. Otherwise, we just ignore it. For those of you that, right? For those of you that do divination, you'll know that sometimes, you're asking a question like, should I buy this car or not? And the divination comes back with, you are in a pit. You will never get out if you go forward with this, And you're like, it's just a car. Well, if you get that kind of answer when you're doing divination, it means that wisdom understands that you have your compulsive engines going and you really want that car, but it's not really the right thing to do because, maybe the carburetor's bad and you don't realize it, or a better deal's going to come around in 36 hours and you don't realize it, or something. But the wisdom beings understand that you have a lot of compulsion behind this and you might not listen if it just says, no, please wait for another opportunity. Because there is that kind of answer too. Like if you look in the divination texts, there's a whole range of ways to say don't do that. Right? One just starts with, you already know this isn't the right thing, so just don't do that. To, no, this will not bring about the result you want, to, you are going to be stuck in a pit and flayed until your haunches bleed if you go in that direction. And depending on what condition you're in, you will get, one kind of no versus another. Same thing with a teacher. If a student is very attuned to what's actually happening between student and teacher, then the teacher barely has to say anything. The teacher can just go like this. And off you go, knowing exactly what to do without any hesitation. Or maybe some other student, the teacher has to say, I think it would be a good idea if you did such and such. And okay, done, going. Another student, the teacher has to say, what the fuck are you doing? So this all has to do with what kind of intensity or force is needed to cut through. And this is a hallmark of this kind of tradition, that basically the teacher is signing on to do whatever it takes to help you to wake up. even the most outlandish thing, or the thing that isn't socially acceptable, if that's what it takes, or the thing that's going to make you mad at the teacher. Most people don't have what's called the adhikara, the capacity to teach in this kind of tradition, because they don't want students to be mad at them or angry. It's hard. So that's another kind of fierceness. And that also, goes in the text of the tradition. Well, you have to actually learn that when you're reading the texts, not to take them so literally. Because otherwise, if you take them absolutely literally, you'll freak out, or else you'll just think, oh, this is ridiculous. But you have to understand why you're being talked to that way. Then when you start to show your capacity, you get served up situations that are part of a faster way of working with your karmas. This is why people that get seriously into this kind of tradition have, sometimes get illnesses or get into very difficult situations at some point early on in their practice, or their lives just seem to start falling apart once they start practicing or something like that. Because this is part of the things that need to fall apart. And when wisdom, this alive, aware, wise reality sees what you're capable of, then it serves that to you in its grace and majesty. The other kind of fierceness that's very, very important is your fierceness. People that have the adhikara to be in this kind of tradition for real, like really see this as their home base, have, by default, a more fierce attitude toward waking up. Like more desire, less patience with detours. It doesn't mean that you won't take detours. Everybody takes detours.
So bright.
The dessert is so good, yeah. Everybody takes detours, but it's a matter of degree, right? Really, that feeling of not wanting to be told any lies, not wanting things prettied up, not wanting the baby view, just wanting to get on with it, whatever it is, and being willing to do whatever it takes. So there has to be some of that. There has to be some of that happening. And that's really kind of fierceness. And then as you go along, it becomes more subtle, but it's still very fierce. The attitude of every moment being an opportunity to connect with primordial wisdom and not be doing anything else. Not grabbing on to anything. Just connecting with primordial wisdom and seeing what happens. That's subtle. I mean, it doesn't look like anything from the outside particularly. Right? It's not like you're sitting here in the ring. Right? That everybody can tell. Oh, look, fierce practitioner. Does 5 hours of mantra a day. At one time, that's what fierce was to me. At one time, I was very proud of how many hours of sadhana I did every day. If someone mentioned it, I would feel very proud inside. But really, it's the fierceness of attempting a khanda sadhana that's just directly connecting to wisdom in every moment, relaxing your fixations, not giving yourself time off. That really ultimately becomes the fierceness. So this is a talk was apropos of, I have two, well, I'm sure there are more students who are from the South, but there are two students from the South. One of them is Bhairavi, and another woman on the West Coast named Rebecca, who both told me in the last few weeks that I should be nicer, or, I'm not nice enough, something like that. This talk was apropos of those comments. I think for some of us, that not niceness is the greatest grace. Ma has just excoriated me at times. You know what that word means? Just like chopped my head off, told me I was going in the wrong direction. One time I didn't do something she asked me to do, and I came in this dream and she was already there. She was sitting in a chair and she just looked at me and she went, "You're late." We shouldn't mistake fierceness for meanness. That's a completely different story. Right. A friend of mine who's used to live in an ashram, he has actually lived in several ashrams, and one of the ones he lived in was kind of run by some wacky person who didn't really know what he was doing, and who was just mean to people. But this friend of mine thought, well, this is the way it's supposed to be to help me get rid of my ego. You have to use your wisdom to discern that, right? You don't want people being mean to you for no reason. But fierceness is something very, very different. I've had a variety of teachers, and pretty much to a person, they've all been extremely fierce. But with very, very different flavors. One of my teachers, I could tell it was really difficult for him to be that way. Like he kind of had to work himself up into it. It was kind of sweet to see that he really didn't want to treat people in a fierce way, but he knew he had to. I've had other teachers who were very effective teachers, but you could also tell they'd kind of made it into a self-image, being the fierce one. And then Ma, if you read carefully, Ma's corpus of teachings that have been reported in her satsangs, you'll find some extremely fierce moments in there that she had with her closest students, where she just told them what's what, where she demanded that they do something extremely difficult for them. So people always said, "Oh, Ma is so gentle and sweet, so motherly," and all that was true, of course. But when she was actually working with somebody, doing sadhana, teaching them sadhana, she was extremely fierce. When she knew the person wanted that or could digest that.
Why did she say that she was a little girl?
I don't know for real, but my instinct is that she wanted to teach people how to take care of each other. And that you go to a mother to be taken care of, but toward a child, you take care of the child. So she had everybody do all these things for her, feed her and bathe her and brush her hair and stuff like that, like a little girl. Right? So that I think she was showing us how to take care of each other. If we treated each other all like our own little children, wouldn't that be amazing? But you know how little kids are. Sometimes the little kid is going for the flame, and if you say, "Honey, I don't think you should do that," the kid's going to get burned. You have to say, "Stop!" Sometimes you have to give him a time out. Jayakula is a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. We are based in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. Visit jayakula.org to explore more of our offerings.